Okay. Hello again. It's been so long. I think we're okay now. I'm gonna duck out. If there are any other problems, I will come rushing in. Thank you to everyone for being so patient so far. And let us finally hear an excerpt from Daphne's book.
Okay, hello. Am I hearing echoes of anyone or myself? Okay, good. Okay, good. Um, Thank you, Timbo. Um, Thank you so much for your patience, everyone. I am so sorry about that. Let's do this event. So I am going to be reading an excerpt from my debut novel, Brown Girls, which just came out yesterday. I'm very, very happy. I'm very excited. I hope that you purchase a copy as well. I'm going to be reading the first two vignettes from my debut novel. And I'm really excited about these vignettes because, strangely, the opening pages have not changed of my novel since when I first started it. It was like I wrote it and I didn't touch it and I just left it, oddly enough. So, okay, Brown Girls. We live in the dregs of Queens, New York, where airplanes fly so low that we are certain they will crush us. On our block, a lonely tree grows. Its branches tangle in power lines, its roots upend sidewalks where we ride our bikes before they are stolen. Roots that render the concrete slabs uneven, like a row of crooked teeth. In front yards, not to be confused with actual lawns, grandmothers string laundry lines, hang bed sheets, our brother's shorts and our sneakers scrubbed to look brand new. Take those down, our mothers hiss. This isn't back home. In front yards grow tomatoes that have fought their way through the hard earth. Our grandmothers refuse canes. Our brothers dress in wife beaters. We all sit on stoops made of brick. The Italian boys with their shaved heads zoom by on bikes, staring, their laughter harsh as their shiny gold chains. Our grandparents weed their gardens, and our brothers smoke their cigarettes and, in time, stronger substances we cannot recognize, whose scent makes our heads pulse. Our brothers who ride on bikes, lifting their front wheels high into the air. Brown. If you really want to know, we are the color of 7-Eleven root beer, the color of sand at Rockaway Beach when it blisters the bottoms of our feet, color of soil, color of the charcoal pencil our sisters use to rim their eyes, color of grilled hamburger patties, color of our mother's darkest thread, which she loops through the needle, color of peanut butter, of the odd gene that makes us fair and white as snow. Like, what's her name? Is it Snow White? But don't get it twisted. We're still brown. Dark as 7 p.m. dusk when our mothers switch on lights in empty rooms, exclaim, "Oh, there you are." Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphne. And thank you everyone for sticking around through our technical difficulties. Brown Girls is such a beautiful book, and I'm so excited to talk about it tonight with you, Daphne. And one thing that I really want to talk about and ask you about is this really unique perspective that you take throughout the book, that first person plural voice, the we. The result is that throughout the book, it often feels like we're listening to a group of best friends who are just talking to each other freely. And although they identify as one group, it's clear that there's differences between their upbringings, their personal beliefs, the people they become. And I often felt like I was a fly on the wall, just listening to this group of hilarious, smart women, talking, divulging secrets, sharing life-changing experiences. Yeah. I'm wondering if you can tell us about that decision to use that we voice. There's not many books that use this perspective, and I think it'd be really interesting to hear about why you made that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. I never get tired of talking about the we. I love this point of view because it is so unconventional and so non-traditional. And I think I was really inspired to tell the story using this we voice. I was a second year MFA student at the time at Columbia when I started writing what would become Brown Girls. And I was studying a lot of different short stories, reading a lot of different novels. And I guess I just had the sense that I wanted to do something different than what I had been reading or studying. I had this really incredible workshop professor at the time when I was in my second year of the MFA, and her name is Elisa Chappelle. She's an author. She also co-founded Tin House, and Elisa just kicked my ass in that class, Stephanie. She was just like, she was incredible. I mean, I think just in general for everyone in that class. But what I mean by that is that she really encouraged me and others in the class to not be afraid to take risks in our work, whether that was like thematic or like in terms of an emotional vulnerability on the page, or a formal risk, or any of the above, any combination. And so I remember, I mean, Elisa said a lot of things, but like I remember going home on the subway that day after class, and just like being so excited and so inspired by what she said, like to take risks. And so I started writing those opening pages that I read on the train home. And it was just like a wee voice that kind of, I don't know, came to me. But I think all of those things were in the back of my mind of like wanting to do something new, something fresh and like weird, and not be afraid of being weird. But yeah, it took me some time to really like figure out or articulate like, okay, exactly who is this we voice? Who does this we encapsulate and include? And I think over time I was able to figure out and articulate to myself, just with the help of like my editor, my workshop, my readers, that this we was going to be a chorus of women's voices, women, primarily second generation immigrant daughters from Queens, of different diasporas, women of color. And I knew that I wanted the we to be very elastic and like expansive, but also have this ability to like contract and narrow in to focus on an individual, and to do that in like a single sentence. I wanted that flexibility, and that was a challenge sometimes, like how to capture a collective, how to capture the individual voices. But I think it was really that we that allowed me to, just on a craft level, like have paragraphs that spoke from the collective, or like zero into having the sentence just be very specific, specifically talk about different experiences, like a variety of experiences, and have those sentences side by side to really show the range.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's done so well. You know, you get both kind of this sense of universality, but also this like really deep specificity to each of the characters. And speaking of risks, you know, I think another risk that you took, and first of all, I think it's really amazing that you are, you know, you feel free to take these risks, that you're being encouraged to take these risks, especially in your MFA program, because you're a debut novelist, you know, and I think it's really amazing that you've taken these risks and pulled them off, and they really work.
Thank
and you have this beautiful
you.
novel as a result. But one other risk that I would love to talk about is, your novel is unconventional in that it follows the characters as they grow up,
Right.
which I really enjoyed. So in the first chapter, we begin with the characters in middle school, which you read an excerpt of, and then we slowly see them grow up. They get married, they have careers. One thing that struck me is how as they get older, many of them develop strained relationships with their neighborhoods. Some hardly ever go back to Queens. Others travel abroad to the countries that their parents and grandparents come from to find like a deeper sense of home. Can you talk about how, who the characters are when they're young versus the women that they become when they're older, and why you felt that was so important to show?
Ooh, I think it's a little bit difficult to narrow down exactly who they are when they're younger and who they become when they're older, just because for me in the book, it was really important to show the different paths that people could take, and yeah, just the variety again in their experiences. So yeah, it's a little hard to say like this is who they as a group were when they were younger. This is who they become as young women, because it varies in the book, which was really, really fun to write. But I think that all of the characters experience a certain erasure by society, a certain marginalization due to being women, due to being women of color specifically, not coming from wealth or money. And I think in the book as well, with the characters, there is also a self-erasure, sadly, sometimes that takes place. And I think that's apparent. That's apparent when they're young, and it carries into the character psyches to when they get older. Of that self-erasure looks like, I think, often rejecting their backgrounds or running away from their backgrounds, exactly as you described, of not wanting to go back to Queens, and then like some characters later on deciding to travel back to what's kind of like tongue-in-cheek called ancestral lands, to like reclaim a part of themselves that was erased, or that they were complicit in their own erasure as well. I think that there's this like very American idea of being like a self-made person, or like you can like invent yourself however you want, that I think the book kind of butts up against, or the characters butt up against. I think that they leave Queens, some of them, and they try to remake themselves, and yet there is like there's a loss there. There's a fracture, and I think for the characters, as they grow older, as the book follows them as they grow older, so much of the story is about recognizing how their history, how their roots, how the generations that came before them shaped them, and embracing like all parts of themselves, no matter how contradictory or hard to understand, or it's not even comprehensible. But I think that the characters try to cut off certain parts of their heritage or where they come from, maybe out of shame or fear. But the book is really about, I like to call it like hybridity, and not, which I think is like the opposite of purity, of feeling like I'm only American or I'm only Filipino. It's a hybridity of like all of those different identities. And that was what was most important to show for me through the characters as they age.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, that segues really nicely into something I wanted to ask you about, which is this idea of hybridity and inclusivity. And in your work, there seems to be this call to inclusivity. And I want to know if you'd agree. And so, you use brown girls to describe a variety of heritages, ethnicities, skin tones, and perspectives. And for me personally, it called to mind, the kind of writing that was happening in the 60s and 70s when women of color writers like Gloria Anzaldúa and Cherry Moraga and Audre Lorde were exploring what it meant for feminism to decenter whiteness, right? And back then, they weren't calling themselves women of color. That wasn't a term they were using. Instead, they were calling themselves third world women, right? Which sounds so antiquated and weird now to us. But I just want to read to you what Cherry Moraga defined that term as.
Sure.
So, we are third world consciousness within the first world. We are, in concert with women across the globe, pursuing the same goals, a shared and thriving existence in a world where our leaders have, for the most part, abandoned us, and on a planet on the brink of utter abandonment. So, I was thinking about your work and specifically this term brown and brown girls. And for a lot of Americans, in the same way that third world women felt new at the time, brown might feel new to describe an ethnicity. I'm wondering how you would define brown girls and how you do describe it in your book. And if you see, some of these similarities in the way that, back in the 60s and 70s, these like women of color, prominent writers were thinking of themselves and how you think of this term now.
Right. Wow. I love that question. It's a difficult one, but it's a great one. Because I think how we conceptualize identity is often, it's often shifting. We're sometimes having to define and like redefine what that might mean. I mean, what those terms might mean, brown or women of color or third world women. So it's difficult. But with my novel, I love the term brown girls. And I think it very much ties, of course, into the choice to use the we point of view. They're overlapping and they're intertwined, but I think of brown girls a little similarly to those incredible like feminist writers that you quoted from the 1960s and 70s in terms of this like sisterhood and a deep sense of solidarity. I think that can even go beyond the color of one's skin or how we define our own ethnicities. I think in the book, I think some of those shared experiences with my brown girls, who again are primarily first and second generation women of color from a very particular place, this place in Queens, New York. The shared experiences that I was interested in looking at were how, for example, these characters' family histories and family legacies were impacted by colonialism and imperialism, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of skin color or race. Like, for example, just anecdotally, one of my best friends is Panamanian from Queens. And she has, her grandfather worked for the Navy in Panama. And my friend would describe to me his experiences, her granddad's experiences of working like right by the Panama Canal. And then it made me think, oh, the Panama Canal, there are all of these naval bases in the Philippines that I've heard about. Or I had another friend who is Nigerian, and she described Christian missionaries having this like predominance in where she grew up before she immigrated to the States. And then I thought, oh, Christian missionaries, like that's also in my family's history as well. And that's not, I mean, I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe what I'm describing is like how the West has influenced and impacted all of these third world, formerly called third world places. And so I was thinking about some of those shared experiences just to like make it a little bit more concrete, and then how those historical forces influenced our family's immigration journeys, and after that, our process of assimilation, of like learning English, or their children going to American schools. And then thinking as well, okay, this is where our families come from. This is where the characters' families, that's the legacy, I guess. But what does it look like for them as women living today in contemporary America? How are they perceived? How are they treated? How are their experiences different? How do they diverge? But where do they overlap as well? And then lastly, I guess I'll say I was thinking of those gender expectations as women. In the book, the women of color, the daughters have very different experiences than the characters who are their brothers, for example, who are young men of color. Why is that? How does that manifest? So that was that's what I was interested, I think, in exploring in the book. So I hope that's the meandering way of answering that excellent question.
No, I I had to give you a hard question, but that was a really wonderful answer to it.
Thank you.
And I think, to your point about these overlapping identities, and how they're speaking to each other, they're sometimes disagreeing with each other, they're not just a monolith.
No.
And I think you do that really beautifully by having all of these, you see these young women grow up as a group of friends, and they're comfortable disagreeing with each other, and they're comfortable showing who they really are to each other. And I think, your book, to me, it can only be set in Queens. But clearly, like, this book is resonating with so many readers, right? And it's resonating with people's experiences across the country. And so even though, I grew up in Queens and I loved all of these, kind of references to places that I know really well and have visited, you take us outside of the Queens Center Mall, you take us down the streets, we see the roots coming up from the ground, breaking apart the concrete. It's so very New York City. It's so Queens. And I would love for you to tell us, about why place is so important in your book, and even locally, why is this story set in Queens and not a different borough?
I love stories where place is basically a character in its own right. And I mean, I think that's, I don't know, some books make that a little more obvious or central to their work. But other books, even if place isn't as central of an element, it's like the place is still there. There's a world that needs to be built. And for brown girls, that world was going to be Queens. I mean, I feel a little embarrassed gushing about my workshop professor again, Elisa. But Elisa, I've said this to friends and my editor, who I think is here tonight. But Elisa quoted in class one day Toni Morrison. And the Toni Morrison quote was, if there is a book or a story that you want to read, but it doesn't exist yet, then you must be the one to write it. And I'm pretty sure I went home again and I was like, oh my God, I can't get that quote out of my head. What's the story that I want to read, but I don't see ever, like ever? And it was a story set in Queens, New York. And I don't know, I had always known that Queens, I don't know, maybe I heard it anecdotally. My copy editor did check it, but Queens is actually the most ethnically and linguistically diverse place in the whole country, if not the entire world. And yet, like, no stories were set there really that I could think of, like contemporary stories. So why Queens? I would say it just was, it's close to my heart, and it's a place that was also just totally underrepresented, I think, in art and literature. And I've thought about it. It's like, why is that? We get so many stories set in Manhattan. We get so many stories, coming of age stories set in Brooklyn. I don't know about Staten Island, but for Manhattan and Brooklyn, I think that those places are so much more, well, Manhattan, I think, has a glamour about it. There's an affluence about it. Like, Brooklyn is up and coming, but Queens has this like huge immigrant population. It's so much of it is not particularly affluent, and it's not particularly white, I don't think. And I think so for some of those reasons, perhaps that's why Queens has been a place that has been kind of like on the margins or under the radar. But again, like, this incredibly unique, diverse place. It's vibrant, it's eclectic. It has all of these people from all of these different places, like, living side by side and existing. I don't know. I just found that to be like I thought that could be like a really fascinating, rich world for my book. And I will say also that I think it's been cool hearing people say, "Oh yeah, I have some connections to Queens." It's been a range of like, I live in Queens, or I have family members in Queens, or like, I've never been to Queens at all, but the book still resonates somehow. I don't know. It's been cool to feel like, as an author, the book can give people like the privilege, I'll say, of entering into this world and into this community. It's like, hey, we're going to open a secret door and you can be let in. And that's going to be the book. Yeah.
I love that. I love that. And I also love that you reminded me that Queens actually isn't the most made fun of borough. It's Staten Island. So at least we have one up on them.
Sorry to anyone from Staten Island here. We're just teasing.
Yeah, and Daphne, you and I have talked about this before, but I think, I completely agree that it's really amazing to see like Queens literary community really grow, and lots of, artists and authors come together and establish this community. And shout out to the Astoria Bookshop, because it's one of the only bookstores in Queens that, are doing these kinds of events and plugging along. Mm-hmm. I did want to ask you, so you touched on this a little bit while talking about your MFA, but, for all the writers out there, can you tell us a little bit about your publishing process? Mm-hmm. And I know that, the book started as a short story. Is that right? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, the novel started off as a short story. I handed in, I mentioned being really inspired by my teacher, by what I was reading, what I was thinking about, wanting to do something different, take a risk on the page, in all senses of that word. And so I handed in like 15 pages into my fiction workshop at the time. And I was like, I don't know, it's just a short story. I'd only written short stories up until that point. So I was like, I guess this is just going to be a short story set in Queens. And my classmates, my workshop mates were like, no, I think this could be something longer. And I remember feeling annoyed, like, oh, just take it for what it is. It's I'm calling it a story. It's 15 pages. That's what it is. It's fine. But I think they were right. They were onto something in a sense that I really couldn't stop thinking about this world. I couldn't stop thinking about Queens, about what this voice could be, this we perspective. How far could it expand? How wide could it expand? Like what could it do? So I just kept writing, and the story just kept growing very organically as those pages started to accumulate. And so I remember as well, there was a point when I realized, okay, I think I want to expand this piece. Maybe it'll be a really long short story. I have no clue. I'm not sure. And I know I want to use this we voice, and I know that I want it to be very expansive. So at that point, I realized, oh no, I need to step out of my own purview and my own experiences. So something that was really fun and special as a part of the process of the short story becoming a longer piece, which would eventually become a novel, was getting to interview different childhood friends that I had grown up with. And it was very informal, just like a handful of friends, cousins. And I sent them questions over winter break with the intention of like, these are all women. Again, one of my best friends that I interviewed is Panamanians. Another one is Haitian. One of them is also Filipino. Another one was Chinese, American, all hyphenated. And it was fascinating to hear their responses about like, what sounds and sights do you remember from Queens? What is the difference to you between dating someone who's a person of color and dating someone who's not, someone who's white? And it was so fascinating to get to hear what they said, to see where we overlapped, to see where we diverged. And then from there, I took their responses and did not use a word of it in the book, and instead used it to just like imagine everything else. Wow. Imagine the conflicts, imagine the atmosphere, make shit up as fiction writers do, thankfully, as we can do. So that was just such a joy for me as a part of the process, as a part of this book becoming a novel, to like, get to work with loved ones, I guess.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. I've never heard of someone doing that before, and I think it really does speak to like the multiplicity of voices in your book, and how, it does feel like there's many different personalities shining through. Is this the cue that I need to wrap it up?
Hi, Laura. Oh, I think you're muted, Laura.
Okay. Hi. Yes, that was my very subtle way of saying that we're probably going to start with the Q&A for now. But I would just like to first say that, Stephanie, you are a gifted interviewer / discussion partner. And Daphne, you have such heartfelt, beautiful answers. I was getting weirdly emotional. But yeah, everyone, get your questions in now. You can just press ask a question at the bottom, and everyone else can also vote on what questions they would like answered, so we can prioritize certain ones. But yeah, I am going to start with this one because I really like it. Is there a genre that you haven't written yet but would like to tackle someday?
Ooh, what a spicy question. Um, I I love that question because I think genre can be very limiting sometimes. Like thinking of things in terms of genre. I think that's where I get a lot of joy is in like drawing from different genres. Like for Brown Girls, there's obviously the fiction aspect. There's like this nonfiction aspect of like interviewing people. I had studied poetry before like studying fiction, so like there's a love for language in the book. So like a fusion of those things, I think can create something really interesting. And sometimes I don't believe in being kind of like bound by genre. Or that it can be limiting to an artist. But I will say, I think I've never dabbled in screenwriting. If I could like also answer the question as well and not get philosophical about it, I would. I think that would be really fun to explore. I think because just it's all like dialogue. I hope that answers your
we're
question.
saying Brown Girls, the movie, is coming out.
Oh my gosh, I don't know about that.
No, and I was talking to my partner, and we were talking about your prose and how beautiful it is, and I noted that it has something I really love, which is a poetic sense to it.
Thank you.
There's so much prose that is very cut and dry, and like that is also useful in its own sense. But I love when you can tell the author is also a poet in a sense.
Ooh, that's the highest compliment you can give me. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna read. This next question is really, really good, and I'm not saying that because I wrote it, but I kind of am. So, when I write nonfiction, and I write a lot of personal essays, and I often feel this pressure to write about a marginalized group that I'm part of in like this perfect way that isn't offensive to other people that are part of that group that have maybe had harsher experiences. Do you ever feel this pressure to like write perfect representation?
Ooh, I think that is an awesome question, and it reminds me of. Have you ever read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's "The Danger of the Single Story" or seen the TED Talk? I should say.
No, I've read American.
Okay.
I think is
yeah. It's like it's a brilliant 15-minute TED Talk, "The Danger of a Single Story," and that TED Talk, I think it became like a little what do you call it, like zine or pamphlet or something like that.
Yeah, I have Americana and We Should All Be Feminists, which I think is similar to what you're describing.
Oh yeah, yes, right, like a talk. But she talks, from what I remember, she talks about the danger of a single story in that, how do I phrase it? Why she asked like, why is it that in the publishing industry sometimes there is like only one or very few, say like Filipino American stories? Why are there so few Dominican American stories? Or not that why are there so few, but there's just like so few of them in existence that like all of the attention and all of the weight and all of the burden of representation falls on that story because there are so few stories. And that's bullshit. There should be so many stories to describe or try to capture the range of experiences. Like what you're saying, it makes me think, of course, like your experience is one experience of many, and it's like a systemic issue and problem that like writers from marginalized communities have to like somehow be a spokesperson for that community and like be upstanding or like the model minority or like not ever say anything bad about that community. That's not truthful or interesting in art, I think. So I don't know exactly how to like answer your question, but I think it's just most important to just be as specific, you know, specific and honest to your experience. And then like industry wide, we should have more of these stories. So it's not just the one Argentinian American writer, you know, bearing the weight of like being responsible and representing the community well. That's bullshit, I think.
Yeah.
Stephanie, what do you think of that question?
I think it's always scary. I think, you know, it's, yeah, you know, I think, Daphne, you know, it's going to people and asking them, you know, what was your experience, and actually trying to capture that in a novel is so unique and is such a great idea, and kind of points to this kind of thoughtfulness of like, right, like you don't write a story about a marginalized group without thinking about these things. And I think, you know, if you approach your craft with that kind of care and that kind of thought, and, you know, understanding that, you know, the world is not fair, and that unfortunately, like, our stories will be kind of pigeonholed right into boxes, or we will be seen as a spokesperson for a whole group, then maybe we can, you know, avoid some of the traps along the way and be more thoughtful about the way we write.
That's very beautifully put.
Great question.
Yeah, well, thank you. All right. Oh, this one's fun. Okay. Juan Yu says, "Hi, Daphne. Congratulations. How are you feeling right now after launching your book yesterday and having a conversation with a fellow author today?"
Hi, Juan. Juan and I were classmates in Elisa's workshop, actually, in, when was that? I think 2017. Juan, thank you so much for coming to our event and for bearing with the technical difficulties in the beginning. I'm feeling very, very happy, very excited, and a little overwhelmed. I'm like, oh my gosh, the book is finally out and I can't believe it. I'm so excited.
It's real. It's in someone's home.
I know. She's also there in the background. And it's such a privilege and an honor to get to chat with like Stephanie tonight, who is a Queens author. It's a privilege to be in conversation and to get to like be asked these incredible questions and think a little bit more deeply about the book. It's just been a pleasure all around.
All right. Well, I'm glad you're enjoying this.
It's a celebration. It has to be a celebration because it's finally out.
Oh, I love this one too. I love all these questions. You guys are so thoughtful. I love learning about how your short story grew into a novel. When you were finishing the novel draft, how did you know the story was done? When you wrapped up these girls' lives and said all you wanted about them?
Ooh, that's such a great question. Because for me, writing the book, like completing the book was the hardest, I think one of the hardest parts, because it was scary to be like, oh, it's done, or it's done enough. And I did not have an agent at the time. I didn't have an editor at the time. And so to say, this is done, this is good enough, means like you have to take those next steps. And that scared me. So part of me was like, I never want to be done. It's never going to be done. It's never going to be perfect enough. But that is not super helpful, I think, in growing still and in the book evolving. When did I know it was done? I finished writing the book during in May 2020, which I think was kind of like in between the first and second wave of the pandemic. So that also made it extremely, extremely difficult. Yeah, long story short, I had been working on and off on this book for 3.5 to 4 years. I worked on like short stories and essays and like other things in between. I was working like 2 or 3 different jobs, and bouncing back and forth between writing the novel, and then the pandemic hit, and I did not expect that at all. No one expected it, and yeah, it was a difficult time for me, as I'm sure it was for so many people here. My family members, many of them are healthcare workers in New York City. My mom, my brother are both nurses in Queens. And so that was really tough because I was so worried about them. And I was also furloughed from my jobs at the time. So that was financially very precarious, it felt. And I was like, I think writing this book really kept me sane, and seeing it through till the end and meeting that goal kept me sane. It gave me structure. It gave me a space to take everything that I was feeling, like my sadness, my despair, a way of like escaping the situation, but also like transcending it by like confronting it in the art. Like, I thought I wanted to escape it, but I think art helped me confront everything that was going on. And so all of that being said, I finished the novel. I finished the novel in May 2020, and I sent it to readers, to trusted readers, in June 2020, and they gave me their feedback. And I was like, I've been working on this book throughout grad school, after grad school, through the pandemic. I'm thinking about it. I've gotten feedback. I think I went through all of those steps, and to me, that made me feel like, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I'm ready to take the next steps. I think it's done enough to try to pitch to agents. And even then with my agent, and after that, my editor, working with my editor, Marie, in the fall, there were still changes to make. So it was a process. And when I thought I was done, I wasn't done. Yeah. So it's a journey.
Yeah, I think a big part of the process of publishing your writing is recognizing when it's strong enough for someone else to see the potential in it.
Sure,
And
that's a great way of putting it.
yeah, because I struggle with just being able to submit an essay, you know, and be like, okay, someone will read this and be like, it just needs a few changes at most. But yeah, that's really nerve-wracking, and we are very glad that you did that. I had no idea it took so long. It's insane. Your work ethic is insane. Okay.
I just wanted to add, because Daphne, you mentioned about how you have many nurses in your family and in your network. One question that we didn't get to tonight was about a nonfiction hybrid piece. It actually kind of reads like a long poem, but it's this beautiful piece. If everyone here is interested in reading more of Daphne's work after you devour Brown Girls, it's called The Vertical Interrogation of Nurses. And it's wonderful. And it kind of speaks to, I had no idea that you interviewed people to write your novel. And now I'm seeing, kind of that hybridity of genre, because this piece is a reported piece in that, you ask questions of a group of nurses, and then you make it into this wonderful hybrid nonfiction poem.
Thank you so much. I loved working on that piece. It was really meaningful to work with nurses in my community, to collaborate on it. So thank you so much for shouting it out.
This is wonderful. Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us again, everyone. You are contractually and legally obligated to go buy a copy of Brown Girls. You're not, but it would be super cool of you if you did.
Yes.
And you can also check out Stephanie's book, and
Yes.
the book is They Could Have Named Her Anything.
Yes.
So you can go on the Astoria Bookshop website and order both, and we would be happy to sell them to you. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good night. Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone.